Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to this very special broadcast with Myriad360 and Okta. Now, the topic today might sound like something out of sci-fi, and in some ways it is. It's a revolutionary way to secure your organization, and it's zero trust architecture. And as with all sci-fi, we need a trilogy, and I've got the most fantastic trilogy today. So I would like to introduce my guests before we begin. For the New Hope, I bring you Alpesh Shah from Myriad360. For our Empire Strikes Back, I have Alan Clark from Okta, and to round it all up, the perfect trilogy, I have Jacob Doland from Myriad360. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It's fantastic to be here. So just to explain to the audience the format of the show, we have these three fantastic guests. They're going to talk about zero trust. They're going to talk about some of the things that work on the technical side, and the organizational side, and in the business side. But this is a live broadcast. There's no tricks. There's nothing going on here. So I encourage anyone that's watching this, please comment on the comment section below. Let us know your questions, and we will do our best to answer them over the next hour. So let's begin at the beginning. We want to hear, what is zero trust? We hear a lot of it on the news. It's mentioned all the time. Some people say it's micro-segmentation. Can you explain what zero trust is? And I'm going to start with you, Alpesh.
Sure. So zero trust, everybody, this is like a big buzzword nowadays. It's not something new. It's been around for many, many years. However, now with the whole new world that we are living in, it's a very strange world with the whole pandemic going around the globe. More and more people are working remote, and that has really forced all the organizations to think into the direction about giving the access to their employees that really matters in the area that they really need the access to. So I can have Jake Dolan to go more deeper into the technical part of it, but that is where the zero trust is, just making sure that you are not giving access to people and your employees what that doesn't matter to. I'll give you a funny story about it, that I've been talking to so many clients on a daily basis around zero trust, and now that working from home and remote situations, I have a 5-year-old son who comes out and plays in my office many times. Even now, he can help me understand what is zero trust is. So it is becoming big buzzword, but it is all about simplifying the access and making sure who gets what access. So Jake, do you want to just go into more technical and explain audience what is zero trust and what we do every day?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to address what security has been in order to talk about where it's going, and where it's going is zero trust flat out. So kind of the old ways of doing things that worked for a long time in a simpler world pre-COVID and pre-nation state bad actors. We kind of defined our perimeter as the spot where our physical network connected to the rest of the world, whether that was the internet or business partners or whoever. And most of the security provided by that was done on an IP and port basis on your firewall, right? Like your traditional ACLs and security policies. Zero trust goes far beyond that, and it's using many more access components in order to validate a connection request. It's not just saying, hey, this laptop is inside my network, so it must be a valid connection request. Hey, this user put in a valid username and password, so that must really be them. It's tying in multiple access components and doing a dynamic evaluation of that connection request in order to ensure that it's legitimate. I don't know if I left any room for Andy to add on to that, but by all means, please.
Oh, sure. So one thing I could add to that is that, as you mentioned, zero trust is an architectural concept that is much different than the legacy, perimeter, on-prem, off-prem type of scenario, and that it's really a journey. You're not going to make this kind of fix in one day. So as you just mentioned, you've got to look at all these different aspects of your user, where they're coming from, what they're doing, what they're trying to access. And by doing that, you kind of set up this zero trust architecture infrastructure around you, but it's definitely a journey. And one of the things we can emphasize here today is that part of what we're describing is something that you're going to see evolve over time. And by next year, there could be more factors and more things involved that you'll have to incorporate as well. So think of this more as a mindset and an architecture, and then a quick fix.
So, I mean, before we go into the questions, I have two people here from Myriad360 and one from Okta. What I want to do is, first of all, find out who you are for the audience. I know who you are, but I just want to give a quick introduction to yourself. Wanted to get the Zero Trust, what is it, out of the way, and also what the relationship is with Myriad360 and Okta. So I'm going to go around the room. I'm going to start with you, Alpesh. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So by way of introduction, Andrew Alpesh Shah, I'm the VP of Cybersecurity Solutions here at Myriad, joined about a year and a half ago. So what's my role and responsibility is here to really go out and put together strategy, the vision that Myriad360 go to the market with, and making sure that we align our solutions, design our solutions with our engineering team that really solves the business problems for our clients. So that's in a nutshell my role and responsibility here at Myriad360.
Beautiful. I will go to Jacob.
Yeah. Well, I want to establish my nerd credentials first.
Please do.
I started out on a Commodore VIC-20 with a cassette tape player for a hard drive when I was about 4 years old, learning how to do those 3-2-1 contact, horrible basic programs that never really worked, and you always had to debug, and always got frustrated. Basically spent my life in IT and computing in one way or the other. Got into IT around 17 years old, mostly on the client side, and I did the dirty deed, sold my soul, and moved over to consulting about 8 years ago, and I'm helping probably hundreds of customers at this point.
Fantastic. And Mr. Clark, I will end with you.
So my name's Andy Clark, and I'm a SIAM specialist with Okta, and been Okta quite a few years now. Done a lot of professional services, helping customers implement different kinds of solutions. Now I do a lot with our sales and our partners like Myriad, trying to get customers onboarded and get the right products in their hands. And just to match Jacob's nerd credentials, I actually learned on IBM punch cards. And
we've actually got some of them in the studio. I'm not
probably
joking.
you probably use them for
Trumps me.
Yeah. So yeah, I can definitely remember the nerd stuff. And when we're talking about all this connectivity and remote learning and stuff like that, the very first modem I had was actually acoustically coupled. So you actually put the old receiver into a couple of sockets there. So we would not have been remote in those days, because it wouldn't have been not a very good experience. But luckily today we're in a much better position.
That's fantastic. Well, it's an absolute pleasure. So the way this show is going to work, we're going to talk about Zero Trust. We're going to talk about various things. What we're going to do is we're going to start off with some of the more simpler questions for those that are newer, and then we're going to go deeper and deeper and deeper into it. And I'm going to ask the first question because I'm really interested in this. Right. Previously I ran an MSP, and back in the day we had a firewall. Firewall was great, but I just assumed that's where the security is. You had the data center, you had the stuff, you had the firewall, and that was what was known as the perimeter. But Zero Trust, is the firewall still the perimeter?
I can go, and then Jake dive in, or Andy, whoever you prefer.
Yep.
So firewall, yeah, that perimeter is still there, but is not there. Let's put it that way. I would call identity is the new perimeter, or whoever you are is the perimeter, because you take the work with you no matter where you are, where you're working from. Back in the old days, everything was in the data center. You were going to the office. Everything was behind the four walls of your organization. Not anymore. I mean, that's a simple answer for in a simple English language. But let Andy and Jacob elaborate more on the technical side.
Come on, techies, tell us.
I'll
start with Jacob. Come on, Jacob.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I kind of think of the perimeter as wherever your critical assets are, right? If it's if an application that your users need to access and it's hosted in somebody else's cloud, then somebody else's cloud is part of your perimeter. So it's really not one single unified thing anymore. It's a whole bunch of different little perimeters. You could even say micro perimeter. That's actually a Zero Trust term that you have to slap around wherever your assets are to make sure that they're secured.
So I can add a little color. So I'm one of those people that hasn't changed very much during the pandemic here. I've been working from home for past 15 years. And way back in those days, everything that you did remotely had to be done through a VPN. So basically, you still had that network perimeter, but now you put yourself inside that perimeter, albeit through some technology. As we've been mentioning, that perimeter really doesn't exist. You got people working from coffee shops in this, and they're accessing applications that are in the clouds. So you're really never passing through that perimeter firewall anymore. So this whole zero trust infrastructure that we're talking about, it basically allows that perimeter to be kind of anything. So it's no longer the firewalls of a office or a campus. It's kind of the firewall that you put around your particular application as to, hey, what do I need to see before I'm going to let you in here?
It's really interesting. So we've spoken about some of the technology, but I want to dig into the nitty-gritty about the organizations that this is well suited for. Who are these organizations? Who's ready for zero trust? What kind of organizations are adopting this, and how do they know when, now is the time we should start looking into zero trust?
I'll take that one first, because it's actually something that Myriad360 offers some zero trust workshops, and one of the common objections we get from clients is they might be interested in it, but they don't think that they're in a mature enough state to take full advantage of it. But to Andy's earlier point, zero trust in many ways, it's an architecture, but there's kind of a discrete component of the philosophy, and that's an organizational-wide philosophy. And so, building consensus, putting policy and governance in place, all of these things don't require any technical work, but they're all vital to actually getting to a good, secure state that follows zero trust principles. And so the reality of that is that means that you can start having those political battles right now, today, if you want to, which means that any organization that's interested in pursuing zero trust can start, even if you have vulnerabilities all over and you still got that Windows 95 box squirreled away in a corner somewhere. It's time to start doing the homework.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would actually boil it down to pretty much everybody is ready. But as Jacob just mentioned, workshops and things that consultant houses like Myriad offer is really to define where you're at. So you're ready for it. Now you might have a lot of old legacy tech stack that just needs to be kind of understood and revamped and thrown out maybe. But yeah, everybody's ready for it. It's just a matter of where are you on that maturity curve. And what's your next step? What's your priority? What kind of users do you have, and what's your most vulnerable asset that you have to get on right away? Maybe protecting the lunch menu is not that big a deal just now, because no one's coming into the office anyway. But yeah, I think everybody is ready for it. It's just a matter of figuring out where you fit and what your priorities are. Al, anything to add?
Yeah, that's a good point, guys, and that's exactly what Jake and I do on a daily basis to really emphasize that part to our clients, to really make them understand, like, what, it's not something applicable to an organization who have all the employees working remote, but it's applicable to pretty much everyone. And how it applies to your organization, that is something that what we do in making them understand and help them to really align, like, what controls, what access components as part of that understanding process. So in a nutshell, Andrew, at the end of the day, this is applicable to every single organization, period.
Would you be able, possibly Alpesh, would you be able to give us an example of, not a company name, but an example of an industry and why they've benefited from this? So if we just took an industry, I don't know, I read something recently about most travel sites, for example, always get hacked and things like that. Is there any particular industry you can just think of straight away that was like, this has been perfect for them?
I would say any industry who is having their employees accessing resource or all the critical assets, no matter how they are, from remote locations, and especially with all the usage of so many SaaS applications and maybe hybrid applications sitting in the data center versus certain things in the cloud, all those things, any organizations, and this is not limited to a specific vertical. It is it is applicable to every single organization who is using the resources in some fashions, either be SaaS or hybrid applications, or allowing their people to come remotely from either bring your own device or their own or the company assets. It's applicable to every single one. I'll let Jack elaborate more on what we have seen recently of few of our clients that we work with, on the workshop side.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly applies to any industry, or I would say any industry that cares about not being breached, which is probably, but it almost gets into a cultural priorities thing at that point, right? Like healthcare, a lot of our healthcare customers, they're very interested in zero trust because that's, it's not just boring IT at that point. It is sometimes literally matters of life and death. Government is another one. We do see a lot of interest from the financial sector. They're actually usually leading a lot of the implementation of any new security initiative. But it doesn't mean that everyone doesn't have it apply, right? I mean, we've had plenty of interest from media companies, advertising agencies, sports leagues, like virtually anyone you can think of can benefit from it, right? Because we all have IP, we all have sensitive information, we all have employees with payroll information and social security numbers and things like that, and we don't want that stuff published out on the internet. So, it's there's really nowhere that it wouldn't fit in. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting, and it's I mean, I said at the start that I've been hearing this term used more and more and more, and not just during this pandemic, just over the years, it's just increasing. So there's definitely an increase in awareness. Now, my producers have passed me some questions, and they're now getting to the point where I am unsure what they mean. So you may, for both myself and the benefit of some of the audience watching, you may need to explain a little bit what these questions mean as well. But so I'm going to go through them.
What's the matter, Andrew? You're not a nerd?
I am, but I kind of stopped around 2010. I'm just out of practice. The question I got given was what factors contribute to access decision policy? Can someone maybe explain what that means to begin with, and then explain the factors themselves?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So you kind of get into some murky terms here because when we say factors, a lot of the times people can think of that as multi-factor, as in multi-factor for an identity request. But there's actually extra factors within Zero Trust that really need to be incorporated into just about any decision about whether a request is valid or not. Identity, a username and password is certainly one of the primary ones, and that includes having something like multi-factor authentication. But the state of the device that's making the request, if it's somebody's personal phone, if it's a corporate laptop, if it has antivirus running, things like that also really should be incorporated into evaluating if that request is valid or not. The network or the location is also pretty important. I mean, you're not supposed to automatically assume that anything inside your legacy perimeter is a valid endpoint, but that certainly is one component that does need to be incorporated. These all need to be taken together, and that kind of brings us to the fourth component, at least the way that I think of it, and that's the context. That's not just the context of that individual request, making sure that it's a valid username and password coming from an expected location, from an expected approved device, but it's also making sure that, I always use the example that I'm a pretty lazy person. And so if I'm making a connection request at 3 a.m. on a Saturday and there's not like a migration that I'm working on, that's probably not valid because Jake doesn't work at those hours. Yeah. Andy, I'm pretty sure you got a lot to add on this one.
There's a lot to say that I agree. That the nomenclature here can be tough, especially for the audience, depending where you're from and what your background is. So I look at all these things as being different components, and as you're maturing, you might be able to add different components into it. There might be a risk factor from some third party. Definitely the things that Jacob mentioned. What IP address you're on, what's your location, velocity problems. Did I log in 5 minutes ago from California and now suddenly I'm logging in from South America? Obviously, that's kind of a problem. I wish I could do that, but I can't. There's a lot of these components that can kind of factor in, and that's kind of where policies and adaptive policies could come into play. All part of your zero trust architecture. As Jacob mentioned in the very beginning, a lot of this stuff is really not so much getting more technology involved, it's getting your policies straightened out. So as you have all these components, you figure out what components can I get my fingers on, which ones can I actually bring into a policy, and then I decide that what is most important, and which factor kind of weighs more heavily on the final outcome. And then you have to decide, what am I going to do with that outcome? So yeah, definitely all these components kind of weigh in on what you're finally going to do with that request.
Okay, beautiful. Well, that was a very technical answer. And I'm going to ask one more technical question, and then I'm going to bring it back to some of the higher level stuff. The next question I got asked was, do the available second factors all provide the same level of security? What is a second factor?
So in this case, I think we're talking about identity and multi-factor authentication.
Yeah.
No, they absolutely do not. Text messages, for instance, have been proven vulnerable for a long time at this point. So just getting a PIN code on your text, I mean, it's better than nothing, but you still have a hole there. And really, if you want to get to the most basic of MFAs, it's what's your mother's maiden name or something else that really isn't that difficult to find out about someone if you're really doing a targeted attack. On the flip side of that, there's something like using, and I'll go ahead and plug Okta here since they do have a good product like Okta Verify, where it's doing a push that's all encrypted from end to end. It's very difficult to intercept. It's very difficult to tamper with. That is certainly gives you a higher level of assurance that a user is who they say they are over, say, answering, what their favorite car was or something like that.
Yeah, and I could just add to that a little bit. So as you mentioned, things like, using your mother's maiden name, at some point in time, 20 years ago, that was kind of hard to figure out. But now with the internet and Facebook, you can, just Google it and probably find out a lot more than just that about somebody.
Probably in parentheses on the mother's Facebook page, right?
Exactly. So, there's a constantly evolving landscape of factors out there. Things that were great 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago are now deciding that, hey, that's just not good enough anymore. I mean, it used to be that an SMS was great. Now, Jacob made a good point there. Sometimes it's better than nothing. So, we all had security questions in our past lives for different applications, and they're pretty much been, shot down as really not being that good because of Facebook and stuff. But at the end of the day, you've got this concept, if you're trying to do like a retail application or something like that, better than nothing is better than nothing. So it's better than just not even trying. So they all have to, these different factors all have their place in the landscape. It's just a matter of, what are you trying to protect? What kind of silo are you in? Who are your customers? They contractors, full-time employees, customers. So they all have a place, but yeah, they definitely have different levels of security involved. And like I said, nowadays we have much more advanced technical devices, so we can get into biometrics and stuff like that, which are probably the highest order. I don't know, Alpesh, what would you consider? What's the highest order of factor?
Absolutely, the biometric is, I would consider the highest factor in that order, for say. As Jake said, it is proven that the PIN code that you receive on your phone is broken, and however, it is definitely better than nothing. So you have to have second factor. We have seen many organizations, also utilizing some sort of a digital certificate, if it is a company asset device, company asset, device, whatever it is. That's where you can control, all the assets that you have given to your employees, by just putting a digital certificate, and then that this particular device is owned by us, and we can trust that. But there are many ways of second factor. But biometric by far the up in the list out there. But bad guys, man, Andrew, are after everything, and it's just a matter of time when we have all this newer technology, the high computational power coming out. God knows, I mean, we need to be right every time, and they need to be right only once. So we just need to continuously improve our security posture as we move along.
Good point.
Well, I know a little bit more about this than I probably let on, but I'm being coy. But one of the things that has always been an issue with cybersecurity, security, and anything has been the human element to it. And I imagine that's the big problem for any network engineer, any CISO, anyone like that that's trying to keep it. Is educating the human beings that are using the network still a problem, or is this now just a case of everything's just and it just?
Let me answer that, Andrew.
Yep.
You know, a lot of times, you know, many CISOs and directors and, you know, security heads come and ask me that, Al, we have all the controls and I have this additional money in the budget. Where do you think I should be spending? And I said, you know what? Educate your employees. You know, the money spent on educating your employees is probably the best investment one can make. It does not only help your organization, but it also helps the employees at a personal level for their home network. I mean, it goes long way, and having their cyber hygiene, the second becoming a second nature of all your employees, is automatically going to make your network secure and stronger. I can assure you for that, because no matter how many controls you put in place, but if one of your employees is going to make one stupid mistake, boom, you know what? The bad guys are in your environment, and all the money that you spend is going to be at, you know, just at waste. So making sure you continuously, and that's the important part, continuous, because the threat landscape is continuously changing. The new threats are coming every second, and you have to continuously update with the education to your employees to make sure that they are updated on what's happening out there in the world, you know, and how you should be looking at those kind of like a bad email, like, hey, you know, look at those spelling mistakes, look at those bad URL, etc. That kind of education on a continuous basis is the key, in my opinion. What do you think, Jake?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly important, but it does make me think of this quote. It was like John Chambers or someone like that back in the 90s when I was about 17 years old. And I really objected to it, but he basically said that the duty of IT, or the duty of technologists, is to simplify the technology and make it easy to use. And, you know, the nerd in me wanted to object. No, this is just for nerds. Keep all the normies out and all that stuff. But the truth is he's right. But the part that we missed there is that we also have to make it secure without them necessarily needing extensive training. So, I mean, absolutely, we don't have that solution. We don't have that silver bullet yet. Security is not to that state. And until we get to that spot where just everything's automatically secure, assuming we ever get there, then yeah, I mean, you absolutely have to key in your users as much as possible. But it's always a challenge to give them the information that's actionable and interesting and doesn't just, you know, turn into their bedtime reading.
You know, I definitely agree, because I guess productivity versus security is always kind of at two ends of the scale, and just getting that least amount of friction possible for what you're trying to access is an important thing to get right. You don't want to put 3 factors in front of, you know, trying to get to every app. People will just kind of give up and run screaming for the hills, but you don't want to let them in too easily either. One other thing, just you know, you're talking about user education, Andrew, is I'm sure we've all seen people who take their passwords and put them on a Post-it note and put it on their monitor, and or they reuse the same password for 10 years. You know, things like that are kind of, you know, compelling new technologies, as you know, we were just alluding to. So like Okta now has passwordless options. You know, FastPass is a new one that's coming up, where we basically take that password away from the user. So you can throw away your Post-it notes. You don't need them anymore. And now we're doing things to like we want you to be educated and not write it on a Post-it and not use the same one every day. But we can't count on people to take that education to heart or change their habits. So we're trying to get some technology in place to say, hey, we're going to take that vulnerability away from you and just give you a better, more secure way of doing it, but trying not to increase the friction while we're doing that. But it is a balance, and it's often a hard balance for an organization to come to.
It's fascinating. Well, for those of you just joining us now, you are watching this very special panel on Zero Trust Architecture with Myriad360 and Okta, and our 3 cybersecurity celebrities, that is Alpesh Shah, Jacob Doland, and Andy Clark. So we've just spoken about what Zero Trust is, and we've spoken about some of the companies that we concluded it's suitable for all companies, and some of the more technical things in it. So I'm going to go right back to the Zero Trust model, which is what this is all built on. What role does the target application play in this Zero Trust model? And what is a target application? There you go. Answer me that.
Well, I think the target application, and you know, it's going to be unique to every organization, and sometimes that's what gets tough about implementing Zero Trust anywhere. Is you could do a full implementation in one environment, and you go to the next one, and it's a totally different set of constraints and a totally different set of applications, and including where they're hosted, right? Like I have a client who is still using old mainframes for some vital business functions, AX400 specifically, and the way you go about securing those is quite a bit different than what you would do with like SuccessFactors or some sort of HR app that's sitting out in the cloud. You have to use different technical controls, what the authentication mechanisms they support on the back end. It gets complicated, and it definitely gets bespoke, contingent on the environment, I would say.
Beautiful.
And you mentioned that AS400 had critical business data. Sometimes we want to kind of keep everything in a perspective. If you have vital business data, HR data, maybe financial data for your company, you definitely want to put a lot more emphasis on reducing the risk of a breach in those systems. But if you're trying to, do something monumental to protect the cafeteria's lunch menu, maybe that's a little bit too much. So the target application can really play into it. Whereas, depending on what the company, the user is trying to access within the, the company data structure, some things you're like, if we happen to make a mistake here because we're trying to make it very easy, the consequences are very, very small. So they know it's Taco Tuesday, but you don't want your corporate data to get out, a couple of days before you're doing your stock IPO. So there's definitely different levels of data behind these target applications that have to be taken into account when you're assessing what you're going to do and what you're going to build.
Well, I'm going to come back. We've actually had some questions that have come in from LinkedIn. So thank you, everybody that's watching. We are live, and we have got your questions, so we are going to ask them. But before we do that, before we go into a technical question, I have a question for Alpesh. So I'm a CISO. I pick up the phone and say, Alpesh, I need your help here. I've got this enormous organization, and we need to implement. Everybody's telling me we need to implement zero trust. Alpesh, where do I start? Where should I focus?
Okay, I would say one thing. Do you have first of all, an approval from the executive on the strategy that you're trying to put? Why are you looking for zero trust? What is driving? What are the business drivers behind you thinking about implementing zero trust architecture? To me, that is the key. We can sell so many different varieties of solutions, controls, etc., but at the end of the day, are we aligning with the business expectations and business requirements? So first thing first, making sure that we are aligning with the business leaders, and to that end, having that governance from a top-down approach is the key. Making sure that you have defined your business requirements as part of the governance, you have the policy, you have the process, you have the procedures, making sure that, hey, if I have an employee working remote from their own device, how is that going to be connected to our network? Have we defined that in a specific policy versus a company-owned device versus your own device? What is that? And let me tell you, Andrew, we have done a few of the workshops between myself and Jacob, and we were kind of strained and shocked, in a way where they are allowing employees to come remote and using their own device, but they don't have any policy that, hey, if you are going to use your own device, what you can and you cannot do from accessing the company assets perspective, and also using your own home printer. I'll tell you, one of the most immediate threat when people are having about zero trust and making sure people work from home is that if I'm using my own device and getting into my company's assets, can I print to my own home printer without any restrictions? And that is one of the most easiest way I see lately, the leakage of your sensitive information within the organization. So, Andrew, as to answer your questions, if you are the CISO calling me, where do I start? Okay, let's get your business requirements, your business expectations, your business drivers aligned, and having the governance in place, and then we can go down to nuts and bolts about different access components, technical controls, administrative controls, etc.
I knew there was a reason I had Alpesh on Quick Dial. That's perfect. That's a perfect answer. Thank you, Alpesh.
Listen, and I have Jacob and Andy on my Quick Dial, so that's why I can answer that.
Well, with that in mind, I'm going to ask some technical questions now. So I don't necessarily understand all the acronyms, the big bad world of acronyms, but I will try my best. These have come in from the audience. So this one is for Jacob. What's the difference between conducting a security assessment, stroke audit, stroke penetration testing versus completing a zero trust architecture assessment, stroke workshop?
You know, it's really the methodology and what the result is. When I'm speaking for how Myriad360 operates here, when we are doing anything with zero trust, instead of thinking about it as trying to secure everything from the outside in, you know, the things we always emphasize is to understand where all your assets are and the importance to the business and the risk level that they have there. And you start putting these micro perimeters, the term I used earlier, around your critical assets and your high risk assets wherever they are. And then start triaging from there.
Okay.
If I can add to that a little bit on that, Andrew. So yeah, security assessments and ZTA assessments, you know, sometimes they may be overlapping, but as Jake said, there are some nuances that really differentiate that. So if you are strictly looking from a pen test or security assessment perspective, what it is that you perform a vulnerability scan, it identifies the vulnerabilities, and the pen test is just the validation of that vulnerabilities to make sure that can I get into your environment. However, the ZTA assessment is not about technically performing that, you know, a validation of the vulnerabilities, but more of an understanding that, okay, do you have that remote access policy? And if it is, then how are you allowing the access? What controls you have in place? And then probing that specific control from the remote access perspective, while just, hey, you know what are the other assets, what it is. That's not the purpose of ZTA per se, just to differentiate like in a more technical terms. But many times if you perform a more comprehensive in-depth security assessment / pen test / red team, whatever you want to call that, it can include everything, all the access components that you can really validate the vulnerabilities of those access components, which are falling under ZTA.
Yeah, and you know, I would just add to that, was just mentioned a moment ago, is what is the outcome? So if you look at any time you're going to interface with a customer, you're going to ask discovery questions. You're going to try to figure out what's their vision, and from where they are current state to their vision, what are the gaps, and within those gaps, what are the priorities? And then from those priorities, you come up with a plan to kind of take them along their journey. So having an assessment or workshop, what's a deliverable back to the customer, and how can you be the most value to the customer? It's great to give them lots of buzzwords and kind of talk to them and educate them on the technology, but maybe sometimes the thing that the customer needs the most is that detailed plan of, hey, here's your priorities and here's how you're going to get there. It might take you 6 months, it might take you 18, but here's a plan, and we're going to lay that out for you, and then we can potentially help you meet your plan.
What a fantastic question. Producers, please make sure you give that person that asked that a thumbs up on LinkedIn or wherever it's called these days, the thumb. Another technical question, because I love asking questions because you don't know what's coming up, so it's great. Put you on the spot. There was I won't say the name, but there was a large financial company, let's call it Andrew Bank. There was a large financial company that was breached recently because of a vulnerability in the WAF and insufficient IAM protocols. How would Zero Trust prevent something like that?
That's a good one. Because going back to Zero Trust being an architecture and a philosophy, it's not necessarily a prescriptive list of technical controls. One of the things that should have come up in adopting that philosophy in that organization is understanding where your risky assets are. And something like a WAF that has a vulnerability, certainly any security tool with a vulnerability instantly becomes a high risk item that needs to be remediated, pretty much top of your list. So as part of Zero Trust and your philosophy, that triage is a key component. So understanding that, staying on top of patch notes for your critical assets, wherever they are, if it's a WAF in the cloud, if it's your on-prem WAF, whatever, that becomes a vital task that you have to keep on top of. It's definitely part of the maintenance of the architecture that you have to do.
Thank you.
You nailed it.
One other component of ZTA, which is the continuous validation of access control, and making sure that you perform that on a more regular cadence, correct? So if you have an web application firewall, WAF, correct? It's protecting one of your critical assets. Are you really making sure that, that particular firewall is protecting your critical assets, the way it's supposed to happen, correct? And that's what we meant by the continuous access control validation. And that is one of the part of, ZTA. So how does that tie in? That's exactly how they tie in. What Jake just mentioned about the other, areas and continuous validation of access control, that could have, help identifying those vulnerabilities and probably help prevent, the breach that we are talking about.
Another great question, Ben. That's definitely a clap emoji for that one. Thank you for that for our viewers. Okay, so let's go back to what we were talking about. One of the things you mentioned earlier, you said no one size fits all. Can you clarify what you actually meant by that?
Yeah, I'll take that one because I think I was the one that dropped that. Yeah, I mean, it kind of echoes some points I've made earlier, that basically there isn't just some silver bullet that you can drop into your infrastructure and suddenly you're secured to zero trust standards. Every business has different priorities. They have different drivers, different ways they make money, and different lists of critical assets that needs to be secured. And then all of those assets, there's sorry for the terrible pun, but there's a myriad of ways that they can be and back-end capabilities and how they can be authenticated against and things like that, which means that, like, I'm not going to lie, there's a lot of discovery and a lot of decisions that have to be made as you're going through your zero trust journey, deciding what is the most important thing to secure, and then securing it to the best of your ability. That might be from, it might be literally sticking a firewall in front of it, but typically it's going to be a next gen firewall that can do all the identity and device checking and all the things that are required for it. But if it's a SaaS app, I mean, good luck. You go ask Dropbox or AWS to let you put a firewall in their infrastructure. They're not going to, obviously. So you have to have some other mechanism for how to secure those assets.
Yeah, and when you look at a lot of today's companies, you go from these vast multinational companies that are doing business in every continent in so many different environments, down to a little ma and pa retail that has they threw up a site in AWS and they're trying to sell their version of pottery or something like that. So yeah, the whole one size doesn't fit all is very true, because from cost constraints to what kind of technology you need, based on what you're trying to protect, and then just the environment. I mean, the regulatory environment to change things if you're working in these multinational corporations can be staggering. So yeah, you definitely have to understand where you're going, but realize that the solution that worked for customer A may not be completely right, or may be completely wrong for customer B.
So in the Bell, in the UK, we have a lot of regulations around data, around cloud services, and I imagine all over the globe there's different variations on this. And policy and governance, it's something that's repeated again and again and again. It's in the news. You get emails about it. Zero trust. How does zero trust fit into governance and policy? If at all?
It's kind of the groundwork in order to get anywhere with it. That's, and there's kind of two ways of looking at it. There's the pieces of paper that you circulate throughout the organization and say, hey, this is how we allow your devices to access our assets. This is how you're going to work from home. This is what we consider acceptable use and things like that. It's getting that paperwork in place and making sure that you have standards for what your security controls are, and that kind of becomes your stick at that point when you're working through it within your organization, right? You can say, hey, I have management buy-in, you have to do this, and it takes away a lot of the fights. But there's there's also a lot of the actual compliance checks themselves to make sure things are following policy and governance. Automated tools that'll make sure that you're following those pieces of paper that were laid out, and they're not just pieces of paper.
Yeah, if I can add some more color to that, Andrew. So governance is the key. When you start defining different areas of your environment to be protected versus what sort of controls. So you're talking about privacy regulations, compliance, whatever it may be. Just how does that tie in with ZTA, zero trust, correct? So if you are going to allow your employees to work remote, which nowadays is by default that you are allowing because there is no way, correct? Then what can they do with those critical assets that really applicable as part of the compliance, as part of the privacy regulation? So if I'm a, hey, Andrew is coming from his home or coffee shop from his personal device, then if he's accessing this particular private, privacy data or compliance data, then he can only do certain tasks, versus if he is coming from a company owned device, then he can do certain other tasks. Having that sort of an acceptable use policy, the remote access policy, the BYOD policy, which is part of the governance, is the key. And we see that I mean, one of the big law firms that we were talking, recently, where they were really, having some challenges around defining the data governance, and that exactly ties back to the governance, model, that you don't know, where your critical assets, your critical data is, and if you don't know that, how are you going to define the right policy and how you're going to really secure that? So governance is really starting from that defining perspective, that where is my sensitive critical data is. So discovery, identification, classification, and then comes the protection. So having that entire data governance program in place is the key, which is the at the topmost when it comes to zero trust architecture.
And I'd like to throw in one thing. Don't blame the admin. So, if you have your admin that's kind of, down there typing on a keyboard, trying to put a policy in place, it's really not his job to decide what the policy is. So, like we're talking about, Jacob and Alpesh both, it's that top-down approach. Somebody, whether it's a CISO or some committee, has to decide, hey, this is how we're going to deal with this use case. The person's logging in from home. They got to access financial data, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I understand it's a pandemic and we had to do this within a week, but somebody has to decide what that policy is, and then basically, hopefully written down, pass that down to the admin who's actually going to say, okay, I'm going to craft this based upon what you gave me. If you don't have that governance and that top-down model, the poor guy's down there, just typing away going, oh, I hope I got this right. So yeah, it's really important to kind of have that traceability matrix between, this is what we're deciding as a corporation, as a company, and then we pass that down to all the relevant people who are going to be, actually doing the typing and putting it into practice.
Yeah, and one more thing to add to that is that sometimes what we have seen, that companies define and write those policies one time, and then probably they have not again seen for at least 2-3 years, correct? So the business model changes, depending on the what the companies want to do, how they want to go to market. Things change, things change from the environment. They were having the applications, like many organizations, we see that they used to have an HR application with a thick client, in the environment. Now everybody is going with the SaaS-based applications out there for HR, for example. So those kind of changes continuously shift in every organization. So if those are changes, you also have to really review and revise your policies, your governance documents. So making sure that you have a regular cadence within your organizations to review and update as needed your policies, and your governance documents.
And things sure do move fast these days.
Oh my God, you bet.
Yeah, they do indeed. But Andy, you said the key word here. We have tabloids. I don't know in America. In the UK, we've got tabloids, and one of the
well, we got them too.
You got them
National,
too, right?
National Enquirer. Oh yeah, we have them.
There you go.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, we've got tabloids here, and the tabloids they love to call out the word you used was committee, particularly when our local councils build a building and it's the most functional building on earth, but it's actually completely unfunctional. It's ugly and it's just a box of concrete horror. But that reminded me very much of security and architecture around security, because a committee or even an organization may design something that is the most secure thing in the world. It's unbelievably secure, but it's useless in some ways, because I know my bank that I use historically had put so much checks and balances. You couldn't get into your account. You had to remember like 15 passwords. This is an open question. How would an organization get a balance between being very secure and not frustrating their customers?
Have you guys seen things in your workshops with this friction versus security has come up?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's pretty common, and a lot of it, I think, is almost a mental state, right? Like, Andrew, you're really referring to kind of the fortress thinking.
Yep.
That's my own term. That's sort of made up, and I think increasingly security is not about building a fortress. It's about maintaining a border. Is probably a better metaphor, because things have to cross borders, right? You have to allow goods and people and the flow of things of that, and we have. Depoliticizing everything about a border that's going on today, but you have to secure that in some way at a border, and it's the same way with a business. You have to interact with all of your SaaS providers, all your business partners, all your customers, and you have to secure that flow. If you're interfering with the productivity of your business, then you have a major problem, obviously. So it certainly is something where you always have to take into account the user experience. There's some real world compromises that always have to be made. One that's super relevant, I think, to Okta is the MFA challenges that Andy referred to earlier. I've worked with some organizations where they first rolled out MFA, and it was obscene. Like, it was you MFA'd to connect to the VPN, you MFA'd to open Outlook, you MFA'd to open the next web app. And, in the course of 10 minutes, just to get ready for your day, you're probably responding to like 10 or 15 challenges. And then by that point, you're just pissed off and don't feel like it. So obviously you have to make some sort of compromises. And that does go back to that no one size fits all too, because we all have different levels of user tolerance for security controls. It's not to say that every security control degrades the user experience. There's some that actually can improve them, like having a resource portal like Okta, where all of your applications are in one place, so your users don't have to manage individual bookmarks anymore. But the point is that it always has to be top of mind, right? Like, we're securing to enable. We're not securing to stop. Like, we need to enable our users to be as productive as possible while remaining in a secure state. We're not just, the secure state doesn't trump all in all situations.
Right. So, like, Okta does have some technologies, we call them adaptive MFA, where just like you just mentioned there, you don't want to have 15 MFAs before you can get your first, line of business done for that morning. So the adaptive MFAs are ways of saying, if you're on the same device and you're in the same IP and you're doing the same thing, you logged in at the same time, you're good. Just roll right in. But if suddenly, you're traveling and you're no longer logging in from your home in New York, you're at your vacation property out on the Cape, well, okay, we're going to do something. But once you've established a new pattern, well, then we can kind of ease off and reduce that friction a little bit. So there is some technologies that can kind of help with that, reduced friction type of approach. So you kind of break down the fortress walls. You lower the drawbridge over the moat if I recognize the flag that's kind of riding up on the horse. But yeah, it's definitely it's a struggle, and it's something that once again, from the top down, they have to decide, for this particular application, what's the right level of fortress to put around it.
Yeah, and one more thing, if I can add here, this is what we see, and when we conduct those workshops with our clients about those friction and how we can help them to really reduce that friction to make things easy. That is one of the benefits of ZTA workshop, is really make them understand like how can different teams within the organizations, employees can really adapt and make this entire ZTA architecture more successful. We have the ticker going on the screen, about that. But if anybody is interested in more learning about our workshops, what we do, how do we really go about making things easy for you and help you, you can email us at zta@myriad360.com. That is one of the ways, easy for to reach out to us. You can always reach out to your account executives to really learn more and have one-on-one meeting with myself and Jacob or Andy, whoever you prefer. But yeah, email zta@myriad360.com, or you can go also on our website, myriad360.com/zta, to just learn more about it, and just get some understanding. But that is what we do as part of the workshop, Andrew. Really talk through with the various teams. I mean, how many organizations, Jake, we have spoken so far together, and we have seen multiple teams. Somebody from desktop team, the systems teams, InfoSec, network team. I mean, one says, oh, firewall decision making is the infosec team's decision, but how it gets implemented in the environment is the networking team's responsibility. But making sure that those two teams don't point at each other, if anything goes wrong, is the key. That's the friction. And also when implementing the policies that what infosec team defines for the networking team to implement without really disturbing the users adaptability is the key. And that's, I would say, Andrew, we have done that kind of implementation for so many clients, and Jake and his team is so really good about really making things easy for the clients.
That's very high praise indeed. Well, I can't really follow that one up, Alpesh. You've flattered them more than I ever could. But yeah, I mean, all I ever hear about these workshops, it's such a great thing, and there's so many questions. I mean, I could sit here all night asking questions, and I'm sure companies come to you and say, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? But yeah, no, please get in touch with Alpesh, Jacob, and Andy, and yeah, pick their brains, as we say in the UK. I have one more audience question, and then we'll sadly have to wrap up. But that would I'm going to have to read this because I can see acronyms. No, it's how. One question. How do you foresee the future? This is what I was going to ask. Oh. How do you foresee the future of the remote access VPN client? Do you think that Zero Trust architecture will eventually replace the need for the client-side application? And you know what? I'm actually going to open this question up a little further. What do you think the future is for Zero Trust architecture?
I'll let Jake handle that, and Andy. I'll set it up.
So many different ways. VPN, yeah, I mean, there's some problems with that, or there's some limitations, I should say. I don't think it's going away completely, even if it moves into something like a private access edge where you're still connecting to it and it's just a service provider rather than one location, like sitting in your data center, and you have to have everyone from around the world connect to one place. But saying that, there's a lot of ways to secure traffic without using a VPN. This is such a lob at a softball for Okta, though, because they're exactly one of those. So I am going to pass it over to Andy.
So I agree with that. It's not going to go away just because there's legacy investment in that kind of architecture. But I think what it kind of exemplifies is the fact that some of these legacy things are going to be there for a long time. You have it has a use, you got things embedded into it, they're already integrated. It's just too hard to lift some of the stuff out. You'd rather let it just go end of life and just kind of let it die a natural death. So you're going to have to deal with it for a while. Something like Okta, the strong point is that it's an identity platform. So whether you have a VPN, some old legacy system, or you have a brand new SaaS app that you just wrote and it's the neatest thing since sliced bread and has this wonderful omni-channel experience, or you have something you purchase off the shelf like a HR Workday or something like that. You have all this different type of application and assets that you could potentially get into. Having an identity platform like Okta says, sure, no problem. Whether you have an on-prem app that's header-based, you have something that's behind a VPN, you have a brand new SaaS app that's newly christened, an identity platform can kind of help you say, I got one place, it's got all my policies, no matter what the CISOs and the company comes up with, I have one skill set that says this is how I implement it. I can keep the CISO and everybody happy because they have one place to look to see if it was done right. If you change your mind 6 months from now, there's one place to change it. You don't have 6 different tech stacks that you have to, oh, did I remember that one? The guy who ran that, he left the company and no one else has that skill set anymore. Okay, what are we going to do? We have that concept now that you can deal with all these legacy as well as the brand new cutting edge stuff, as well as the innovations we really haven't thought of yet, but you can do it in one platform so that your governance, your policies, everything's administered with a single skill set. And you just have the ability to kind of get your arms around it. There's enough things changing in the world, with pandemics and stuff like that, that if you have one thing that you can just get your arms around and kind of hit if you remember the easy button, if you can just hit the easy button, that's at least one thing you don't have to worry about. Don't worry about your identity and your security as much. Worry about your core product. Worry about, I think Alpesh or Jacob mentioned, worry about the things that make you money and let others take care of some of your security needs.
Cool.
And sadly, that is all we've got time for, guys. You have been watching the Myriad and Okta, Myriad360 and Okta Zero Trust Architecture panel. It's been a fascinating debate. I've had 3 wonderful guests. I'm going to bring them back on for one more second, I think. But I've had 3 wonderful guests who've been talking to us about Zero Trust Architecture. Please get in touch with Alpesh, Jacob, and Andy. The details are below. The details are on the LinkedIn, and I'm sure the details are elsewhere. Just one more question before I let you go, guys, because you are all self-professed geeks. I want to know, is it Star Wars or Star Trek? Jacob.
Wizards in space versus something that's a little more plausible. I don't know, man. I don't know. I'd probably Star Trek, but
that's
but I love Star Wars. I just recognize.
Andy.
Captain Kirk all the way.
Yeah, and Alpesh.
Star Trek.
Yes, I love it. I love it. I love you guys. You've been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today, and I hope all the viewers enjoyed it. Until next time, I have been joined by the wonderful Jacob Doland, Andy Clark, and Alpesh Shah. You have been watching Myriad360 and Okta, and until next time, I'll see you soon.
All right, thank you very much.